hosted by Spark of Hudson. So I wanted to thank Spark and Shanika for inviting me to have these conversations with all of you. This is the second in a series of 4. So we're doing this monthly on the second Tuesdays from 6 to 7. I want to say hi to Nathaniel, Louise, who are joining us. And so today we're going to be very conversational. Last month, I went through a bunch of slides and covered some concepts about money and the future of money and Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. And so I'm going to do about 5 minutes. I'm going to share my screen in a moment and do just a kind of 5-minute refresher of some of those images and points that we talked about. This session is being recorded, and it's possible that it will be posted on the Spark YouTube channel. So just wanted to let everyone be aware of that in case, that influences whether you want to share your screen, or have the video, or if you want to speak up. The other disclaimer is that nothing that I say here is legal advice or investment advice. I'm an attorney and an impact investment manager, and I've been involved in blockchain and crypto digital assets for 4 years. Prior to that, my focus was on derivatives and commodities trading at big Wall Street firms, and also in sort of the merchant energy trading business. And so I'm not going to talk much more about that in my bio, but just wanted to give that overview and encourage everyone, whatever said here about the potential for Bitcoin or other currencies or assets, it's really, this is for education, this is for entertainment and educational purposes, and do your own research, of course, have to say that. So I'll just share my screen. And also I think Shanika's put some links in the chat for a couple of articles that we circulated in advance. And hopefully if any of you had a chance to read those, love to include some of the points that were covered there in our conversation. Okay, let me share. Okay, so again, I'm just going to flip through this deck really quickly. When we got together a month ago, the news of the day was a Capitol insurgency, and this was a meme that was floating around at that time, and we talked about how it could possibly relate to Bitcoin. Why is this an image from this movie Fight Club with a person holding Bitcoin and American democracy seeming to fall? So I just thought it was like very poignant for the times, and maybe even more relevant in the past 4 weeks and what's been happening, what we've seen in the markets. Let's see. Okay. And this was an image that I think captures in a picture this idea of time in a bottle, and this represents a big way that I think about money as essentially a technology that allows us to bottle time, human time, and this idea of what backs money, the US dollar, what's it backed by? Bitcoin, what's it backed by? Different theories about money, labor theories of money, commodity theories of money. All of them, I think at some level, are dealing with labor, time. What's the ultimate finite resource, which is each of our moments on the earth. So this is what I was wanting to cover with that image. And we looked at the big picture of what's happening in our times, financial crisis, the world's money problems, and how much things have changed and at the same time remain the same. These are red lines from the summer in Texas. And again, I like internet memes, so and internet culture. So I've kind of drawn from things I collect to kind of highlight what I think are some of the important things to think about in terms of money problems. Obviously jobs, wealth or lack thereof, and how people are addressing their money problems. And we talked about this TikTok video, which of course is kind of interesting considering the last couple of weeks, Robinhood and traders on Robinhood and the whole Reddit army, and love to hear your thoughts and talk about that as a phenomenon. But I'd included this clip of, and I won't play the video, but it's essentially a few minutes showing somebody day trading who kind of gets lucky and makes a lot of money, and then, you know, becomes really eccentric. And that this is the tendency at a time like this when people are facing severe money problems, which is to gamble and to take risks. And certainly a lot of what we've seen is that kind of exuberance and enthusiasm and the lure of quick money or a short-term profit, which can have devastating implications for a variety of reasons. You may not even be wrong necessarily about the fundamentals of a stock or the direction of the markets, but then there could be something structural that happens, like your exchange won't let you buy anymore, or won't let you sell, and that impacts the price. So we saw some of that in the markets, and certainly we can talk about that, what happened there. So just wanting to flip through what we covered last time, you know, the beginnings of Bitcoin, the concept of Bitcoin, which was a peer-to-peer, let me go back, you know, this quote from Milton Friedman, a peer-to-peer digital cash that was finally really realized with the invention of Bitcoin in 2008 at the sort of depths of the financial crisis. The paper that was released by an author whose name is Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who the groups or the individuals are that penned that white paper. But it was, at a time, this is an image from, you know, Lehman Brothers, the 2008 crash is a really important marker, I think, for the financial systemic threats facing us, you know, even today. You know, a lot of them can be traced to that moment. And when our central banks around the world began a coordinated experiment of really unleashing an unprecedented amount of currency into our system and debt in the form of debt. So what's made Bitcoin really attractive, I mean, one of the things that's made it attractive, right, is its finite supply. It's been programmed with only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created. So the question of supply, hardness of money versus, you know, unlimited money and what that might do for the value of that currency, the purchasing power of the currency. Many of the tensions around the world, geopolitically, economically, certainly the pandemic, all of which are impacting our sense of trust and our views of the future, and particularly the political situation in the United States over the past while, and as the United States being the steward of the world's reserve currency, what happens here politically definitely impacts the world in terms of the money creation. You know, different forms of money we've used throughout history. The New Yorker article that we shared was, I think, a really terrific survey of some fascinating history, and our own current system involves flooding the system with money as a way to address lots of money problems. So I'm not sure, depending, I guess, on how you guys have your little pictures of people on the side. This graph of money stock, on the far right, there's just like a vertical line that, you know, shows the amount of currency that's in circulation, and the fierce creation of additional debt and liquidity to support our system. And that the money's velocity is at the same time declining. So, you know, this is something that ties into the dynamic we saw happen with GameStop stocks and the Reddit army, and a lot of traders, couch surfing traders, who are taking stimulus money, and instead of that money going into the economy, it's going into stocks. So this money velocity graph is is showing you that money's not actually circulating, which is what we need it to do. It's going into speculation. And I'd love to know what you guys think about the psychology of risk taking when, you know, the money is coming in, you know, not from something that you've earned, but maybe feels like a bit of a windfall, and whether you think that that, you know, has some impact with people's willingness to risk it in a kind of YOLO fashion. The anti-fragile was a theme we ended on, and that the Bitcoin network is a anti-fragile system because it's distributed, and because of its architecture, and we can talk more about that. It has the resiliency that we're not seeing in many of our, you know, legacy systems and architectures of how we transfer money, how we're organizing our political system. And there's a very particular architecture around interacting with cryptocurrency, buying it, storing it safely. And these are images that refer to, you know, an exchange, Coinbase, and a hardware wallet, which is an important theme of protecting really the custody of your crypto assets. So for example, with the Robinhood scenario, a lot of people wanted to withdraw. And I think it wasn't just Robinhood, there were other brokers and complaints on social media that the gates were kind of being closed. You know, what happened was a real shock to the system and potentially caused severe liquidity issues, as many of the broker dealers had to post additional margin to cover their exposure. And so those are cases where, you know, your money is really held in custody by that broker dealer. And if they freeze your account, or, you know, you don't have direct access, and this is one of the opportunities of Bitcoin, complex to take responsibility of those private keys. It's a very sophisticated mechanism there, but the fact that digital assets are bearer instruments and you actually can have possession. It's a kind of strange concept to think about having possession of something that's an intangible. And there will be people in the Bitcoin community and crypto community that say, actually, that's the wrong way to think about it, that it's not possible to possess cryptocurrency and we shouldn't even consider it to be property, that, you know, it's more, maybe more accurate to say that you have control over moving that value, but that you don't necessarily really own Bitcoin. So I'll stop sharing my screen and really just open with a question about rent seeking. So I wanted to introduce this concept of rent seeking and see if it's an interesting place to think about the current money problems in the world and why Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, you know, what's the value, what's one of the value propositions for it. So I wonder if anyone wants to jump in and say anything at this point about rent seeking or anything that you want to talk about on the topic of money problems or what's been happening in the markets.
Hi Kianga, can you be a little more specific about rent seeking? You know, that term may not be familiar to everybody in terms of this discussion or what you're to discuss.
Yes. Let me actually share. So in addition to the articles, hang on, pardon me. I wanted to, the rent seeking, Investopia had a very good, okay, here we go. A definition that, you know, it's an economic concept, you know, essentially referring to actors in the economy that are extracting a fee or they're extracting value out of the system without contributing anything that's productive to that system. And this economic concept in this article from Investopia talks a lot about, government funded social services programs. I think where the market implication in terms of sort of stocks and more in terms of money has to do with all of the additional expenses that go toward providing services. So, the fees, the overdraft fees on the bank accounts, many of the centralized gatekeepers or administrators of aspects of our society that just charge rent for basically everything. We've got to pay insurance, and we've got to pay licensing fees to start a business. So it's this extra financial burden, and there's a view that within the economy, there are those who are productive, who earn money because of their labor, like through wages, and then there's capital. So there are those that earn money through investments that appreciate in value. And then there's this kind of third category of entities and individuals that really do not do really work, and also aren't providing productive capital, but are just kind of extracting value from the system. So that's kind of rent seeking in general. And where I think it's relevant to this conversation we're having on money problems is to think about, where there's stress in the system, where there's disinvestment in the system, why is that the case? Why, for example, we can think about it here. I think about it a lot in New York, and I ride the Metro North, and it costs, an unbelievable amount of money, and yet the infrastructure and the trains don't seem like they've been maintained. Where's all this money actually going in our society, in different places, and our banking system and our capital market system that's takes a lot of rents. Different actors take a lot of rents out of providing. It's questionable how productive their services are to the broader economy.
It's a really interesting. Thank you for sharing that definition. It's really interesting to think about. Thinking about it all the time with our incubator. I just shared a post on social enterprises and what is their actual impact when we're living in this such complex system where we're kind of ultimately creating, I think, more harm than good through our destruction of the planet. And then we're trying to build do-gooder things on top of that. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion, I think Helene is also on this call, about her movement towards getting more co-ops and more of just distributed ownership, I think, is the future, and distributing labor more instead of it, and people knowing more about where things are moving and where things are going. I think that's what people also like about crypto, is that there's more accountability in that system. So I don't know, you could, I guess, go off on a lot of different subjects regarding this. And yeah, I think growing up near Manhattan and Wall Street, you're always Wall Street, it's such an extractive place. And we have our investment accounts there. What value creation are they really creating there? They're moving around money, and it's that's good, but sometimes then you have all the micro trading and things that's really extractive and not really productive. So I guess it's interesting. I don't know. It's just I think we're getting to this point where people are more conscious and wanting to know where the flows are and what's going, and even paying taxes, whether or not you're progressive, it's or not, it's I think everybody wants to know too, where is their tax money going, and how are things moving, and
Yeah.
So
yeah, thanks, Eric. I think you're pointing out all of the right questions and issues, and you reminded me of speaking of not just the tax system, but our stimulus package. And I don't know the exact numbers, but a big portion of that, or, there were fees paid to asset managers. So when there's, $2 billion created to fund the stimulus package, that money has to go to kind of an entity or manager of some kind to actually distribute. In the PPP loans, for example, a big portion of banks get essentially paid a fee to administer that, and it's a service. So businesses should get paid for a service, but it's something that I think struck me is like, wow, how much of that 2 billion is going to BlackRock and kind of the financial system to administer, and is that to me is like part of this rent that's potentially we could eliminate if Bitcoin or some of these crypto networks or the technology or however it evolves could eliminate the need for certain centralized intermediaries and can provide more administration services because they're because it's a programmable system, it's transparent. How much would we save? How much would the economy save that could be put to more productive use?
Yeah, it's funny that, while Eric was talking, and I never heard the term rent seeking until tonight, learning something new, but already. But, when Eric was talking and he, mentioned taxes, I immediately thought about that that video Cardi B made like a year ago or 2 years ago that went viral, where she was like, "Where's my money going?" She's like screaming about "Where's my money going?" Because she was talking about how much money the government takes from her paycheck, and she's just like, I'm down for social services, but is it going to that actually? And so there is a transparency issue in how that really connects to, I think, the stimulus and the conversation that you had, the thing that you brought up about the kind of idea of risk taking and how why do we think the psychology of people doing that instead of what the stimulus is supposed to be doing, which is that they're sharing the money around, instead they're investing it. But I really think that it's because you have these people who are well, we have these bad actors, Wall Street bros or whatever, investors, whatever you want to call them. And we've seen that while we've been trying to, some of us, I think, that are still working from home, and have been engaging. I know a lot of my friends and myself who've been working from home have been engaging in a lot of mutual aid. And so it's we're engaging with a lot of mutual aid in our communities, but also trying to stimulate our local economies. And then you hear about, these big corporations making billions of dollars in this devastating time. And I think that there's this sense of why wouldn't I get in on that? Why wouldn't I extort the system that's not set up to benefit me? And I don't think it's people are ooh, it's free money, because we do pay into a system, right? We pay taxes that this system, America that is run, is supposed to be supporting us, especially in times like this. It's actually our money that you've been holding to give back to us, is how I look at it anyway.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Ellen says in the chat, less bad is still bad.
Yeah, that's what is so many of the conversations in social entrepreneurship even are kind of working within a system that we acknowledge is broken. And it's hard to even imagine what it could look like to make a new system. So often the solutions we come up with are this is better, right? It's it's recycling. It's still plastic, but it's recycling. And so I think I'm really interested in conversations like this one. Thank you for doing this, where we start to really talk about what would it look like to build something that is intrinsically dealing with the challenges rather than band-aiding the problems. And I just want to say I'm going to have to hop off in 15 minutes and not finish this conversation with you, but I'm going on the radio, so I can't.
Oh, very nice. Well, this is going to be continued. This is
because I'm
we're going to continue.
Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. Well, can I ask you then to feedback, continuing on that? Do you see, so the less bad being still bad, how do we get out of the current system? And do you see this model of rent seekers or, you know, centralized forces that are set up as intermediaries? I mean, is that a helpful, you know, place to interrogate and see, well, where can we eliminate the rent? And how do we?
I think, I mean, so disclosure, like Kianga and I love this conversation, but I do think it, I've been really interested in the concept of money and how the flow of money can be a construct that allows for so much, right? Like it can do things that, like, there's a reason it exists, right? So it's not about like, let's get rid of money. And yet, I've been investigating, and I don't know the answer because there are a lot of different opinions on this. There's no consensus. But if we can harness the good parts about money and we can start to pull apart, well, where is the system creating breakage? Like the rent seeking seems like an obvious one to tackle, and yet it's so baked into our current system that it requires a lot of surgery. And like, I don't know if the patient's gonna live. Yeah, I don't have an answer. I'm seeking answers. I think like all of us on this call, like really curious, do we build parallel systems or do we try and shift the existing system? And what's interesting about money is maybe there are ways to build parallel systems actually, through local currency, through Bitcoin, through other avenues, rather than always saying, well, there's only one system. Like maybe there isn't one system.
Thank you. Someone's raised their hand, 917 66.
Oh yeah, hi, Kianga, it's Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, yeah, great, love, just awesome. What a perfect, I mean, better than an audiobook as I'm driving here. You know, these are the types of questions that keep me up at night, and I do absolutely believe we have to build parallel systems, but my experience has also taught me that, you know, we also have to do it from within the system. So, you know, my sort of, I would say my current financial journey started when I read this book by Jacob Needleman called Money and the Meaning of Life, which I highly recommend. And in that book, he talks about, you know, if people really understood the banking system, there would be a revolution overnight. And I don't think the revolution has been overnight, but for me, it was at the time literally going to my financial, I mean, I was in my mid 30s and I had a pretty good career and had some savings and had, you know, tried to do something different that my parents hadn't done. They were still living paycheck to paycheck. And so, you know, I had a financial advisor and I had some money. I literally went to the financial advisor and was like, if I can't put all this money into funds that are green funds and funds that are impact funds, well, they didn't exist at the time. So I was asking them to do something they couldn't do. So I took all the money out. I said, literally, I'm going to put all my money in Main Street. I'm not going to invest in Wall Street. I'm going to invest in Main Street. Well, you know, fortunately, my wife was on board. And so we did that. And we bought 3 properties on 3 different Main Streets in 3 towns here in the Hudson Valley. And we've been working on different modelings to develop these properties. But in the process of that, I've you know, also grown older and had kids and blah, blah, blah. And I've realized, like, credit unions are a way to do it. CSAs are a way to do it. I think cryptocurrency is absolutely the revolution in a, you know, kind of slow and controlled way. Like, we have to find a way, and thank you for this concept of, I can't believe I hadn't heard of this, rent seeking, but it's obviously it's a terribly flawed system, but I do think that we start local, and I do think that you know, this is why I love participating in anything that Spark is doing. You know, as living here in Hudson now since 2012, like I feel like for the number of hours I've spent sitting in on common council meetings and this meeting and that, and then even more so during Zoom, it's just like, it's baffling to me how backwards things still are in this small town, which in my fantasy world was going to be this progressive, amazing community. And the reality is it's not, it's so backwards. But conversations like this, and I think really getting the youth involved are the change. And I think we're doing it right now. So I'm just thrilled that this conversation is happening. And specifically it's happening with, I think all of us are kind of like in a 2 mile square radius, I think, except Eric, you're a little outside the 2 miles, right? But yeah, thank you for that, letting me go off on that little tangent. I wish I could see you all.
Sure, Mark. Thank you for that.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Mark. I mean, I feel like it's like really a safe space, and part of hosting a program like this, and like, you know, what's so lucky about having people like Kianga in our community is to really educate ourselves more, and figuring out ways in which that we can put this knowledge or like new concepts and like make them active in our community. I've lived in Hudson for like 10 years now. But you know, while there are many frustrations with it, what I do really appreciate about this community is that people care, and also people are kind of, you know, they'll grump about it, but they're definitely willing to try new things. And so I think that, you know, programs like this is, you know, the goal is to like figuring out like, well, how can we take what, you know, Kianga's expertise and make it work for our community, and beyond Hudson too.
I have a question. Mark, I appreciate, my name is Nathaniel. I know you can't see me since you're on the phone, but appreciate your example, first of all, of taking your money out of Wall Street and putting it on Main Street. And so as a small business owner, as a Main Street asset holder, one question I have for you is, you know, have you envisioned ways that distributed assets or distributed financial systems, whether it be a local currency or cryptocurrency, could interact with the businesses that you have?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And you know, we started to think, two friends of mine and I started a think tank about 4 years ago to kind of work out some different modelings, because one of the things that was very important to me, having grown up poor and having been on welfare and food stamps and things, like I felt a real empathy and sensitivity to, like, I will never evict a tenant if I buy a property. Like, I'm not going to be a part of that sort of displacement. And so immediately it became like, okay, well, what are some of the solutions? So I think with Main Streets, it really depends on the scale. Like, I found quickly, like, Hudson was already too big for the types of things that I wanted to do. So I'm like, okay, I need to start looking towards like Leeds or Catskill or Germantown or small. And one of the models that we worked at was kind of like we envisioned a sort of like World's Fair-esque type event where you basically have to kind of like purchase the whole Main Street, right? And you have to recharter the town, and then you have to find ways to basically give the properties to the artists that are going to inhabit them. Well, how do you do that? Well, you need to it was a sponsorship model, which is why we thought the World's Fair model could be like the thing, like, come to this town with solar roads and, you know, makers who own their shops, because ultimately, let's be honest, it comes down to the dollar or the deed. And so, like, I'm always just interested, like, how can the deeds, meaning the actual real property, become property of the makers and the artists and the people that are gentrifying? So, you know, I think one way is to find like creative ways for owners or for renters to rent to own. I like that model where, you know, because I mean, we've seen it in any place where, like, any place artists can afford to live, ultimately becomes, you know, cooler and hip, and then the rent prices go up. I mean, we've seen this cycle. So it's like, how can the artists own at the right time? You know, how can they get in at the right time? And then how can that wealth be distributed equitably? And I think it's through a lot of trade, a lot of bartering, a lot of CSA. You know, in this World's Fair model, there's no real money exchanged. It's all currency is either digital or barter. But I think we need larger experiments like that. You know, we need pilot. Those are the pilot programs we need. I think we need entire small towns converted to barter systems. I mean, we've seen, and I'll just show, like, I studied intentional communities for a while, and they all fail. There's one that didn't. It's called the Possibility Alliance, and like ultimately they all fail because they're in the middle of nowhere. They're all based on like rural farm communities, and they all end up dealing with the issue of needing the dollar. And the Possibility Alliance, they barter everything, and then they do permaculture workshops for donation, and that's how they get the little bit of money that they need, you know, in the dead of winter when they need something. So I thought, like, start with Main Street, because the great thing about a Main Street is you can always have real cash or crypto cash infused by people who visit the town. So, and this is something we deal with in Hudson all the time, with like, how do we balance tourism with the local economy? And
Right. Well, Eric, also appreciate all of your comments there, and it ties into one of the things that I like to emphasize above and beyond the price of the cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is that it's a technology, that it's a tool, and that we having something digital in terms of, you know, thinking about how do we share equity, how do we share ownership, how do we share capital appreciation, having actually a digital ledger that's transparent, that can record information and keep track of, you know, who owns what, and transfer that value in a tangible, not a tangible way, it's intangible, but that it's divisible into micro units. I think that this digital nature of a scarce asset or a scarce object provides a way for us to experiment with some of these ideas and maybe be successful. It's more successful now than prior to having this technology. And another, you know, really exciting area of crypto and digital assets is a space called non-fungible tokens. Have people heard about non-fungible tokens? So this is a tech.
Gotta explain that one.
Yeah, so this is a technology that creates a digital asset that's unique, that's entirely unique, so that you can, it's very popular with collectibles, with art. You can program essentially a digital unit that is absolutely singular. So this has huge applications for, you know, this next version, fourth industrial revolution, when you've got Internet of Things, devices connected, individual objects that may need to be tracked in a global supply chain can be represented by a digital token. And so there's just really tremendous, I think, opportunities, and particularly on a local scale, where we know each other, we can see each other, and we can probably have a kind of trust model for adoption within a controlled environment that is scalable, because the technology is ubiquitous. Here's another comment in the chat. Another recommendation. He can get pretty out there.
Einstein's definitely for the deeply intellectual, but the concepts in sacred economics are certainly relevant. I don't want to give up on Hudson just yet, Mark.
No.
I appreciate the World's Fair analogy.
Totally agree. I'm with you. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here, baby.
Yeah.
We're long Hudson. We're long Hudson.
Long on.
Absolutely.
Diamond hands for Hudson, as you would say, Kianga.
Right, diamond ape hands.
But I love to sort of pick up on that thread a little bit, Mark, of how because this is a particular interest to one of my clients around how to take real estate out of, literally, how do we get it out of the transactional market, and how do we distribute ownership directly into the community? So I would say, that's an active thesis that I'm trying to test. And, I don't know if others have any thoughts on, examples or places where that has been done, where, community ownership of the deed, where the deed has been taken out of circulation. Be very interested if anyone's heard of, places where that's been done. Mark, it sounds like you've done some research on this. But yeah, that's definitely something I think we don't need to buy a whole town to do, right? You've got a deed, we've got some deeds. What can be done to experiment with that model?
Some movements, I think I saw one in Michigan that they were like encouraging the community to own Main Street. I think there's a few trends. I don't know, I haven't followed it lately, but that's something I think that would be really
I'm
interesting.
wondering how this relates to land and farmland in particular. And there's been a lot of work. That's one of the key challenges in the Hudson Valley is farmers don't really have access to land because it's priced too high. It's like $10,000 an acre. And so I've been speaking with groups of farmers who are thinking about different models that might look like a trust, an agrarian commons, different things like that, where it does kind of take this land out of the equation of being sold. And so the value and the equity is not in the sale value, which is still something I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around, because I'd love to kind of keep learning more about that. And then tangentially, I was speaking with someone yesterday who kind of brought up this idea out of nowhere. I'm going to read his email just so I don't butcher it. You might interpret it differently than I did. But he's not thinking about land so much as real estate. And so here's what he's thinking is the idea is that there needs to be a synthetic instrument that gives people paying into a system, so people who are paying rent, for example, the ability to earn equity without it being attached to a specific property. So it's a system that accrues the equity, sort of like a REIT. Now the equity has to come from some place, which could be some combination of tax credits or slices of equity in assets that liquidate at an above market return and get converted into this concept that he's kind of coined of portable equity.
I love that.
So yeah, and so I hadn't heard of portable equity. Maybe it's not him, but who coined it. But he certainly was talking about this concept, and it's something that they're working on a white paper on. But I do think there's really something there in divorcing assets that are kind of valued too expensively, or just figuring out how we, and from additional value that is added onto those assets or that's paid into the system, that I'd love to figure out. When I talk about additional kind of value that is created, one of the things I'm hung up on is ecosystem services. So that's where I'm at.
In services, Alex, in terms of how those get funded and provided for within a model, or
how those are kind of brought like out of the realm of externalities into like being intrinsically valued in the terms that we're dealing with.
I really appreciate what you shared there. I agree. There's a lot of agricultural models. I appreciate, like the land trust and conservation movements have done some interesting things there. So I really appreciate you bringing that piece back in, and bridging the urban and rural. I think is one of those unique places that, or
Yeah.
unique opportunities that Hudson has, right? Because it blends.
Yeah.
those two.
And maybe what we're also talking about is our governance models. When you mention, ecosystem services, I think about what Satoshi kind of solved with Bitcoin is, how do we manage a resource and provide the right incentives so that no participant will destroy the value of the community. So there's game
So you don't
theory.
end up in a tragedy of the commons.
Yes, exactly. Right. So there's like game theory with cryptography and the currency. Bitcoin as a currency operating on the Bitcoin network is providing that financial incentive to keep the system in a kind of equilibrium. And it's reminding me of something I think we talked about at one of Albert's sessions on the climate. How can we use greed to remake a system? Let's not try to change human nature working against the grain. But this is one of the things I think so genius about Bitcoin. It's like, okay, we know that I had that greed is good slide. I mean, we know that that's a force. It's a powerful force. And can we use it to create a system, that is not controllable theoretically by any single actor? It doesn't have a single point of failure. It's hopefully very flat, and there's not rent-seeking entities or structures within it. So it's very efficient. And not just Bitcoin, but Ethereum network, which is a different structure. Many of these projects that are open source, the teams and the communities are global, are tackling really tough governance issues. These are almost like new democracies, or maybe even new countries you could think about. And certainly people feel like they're like Bitcoin nation or Ethereum nation or like Doge country. And so that's as much, I think, what we can learn or try in our study of Bitcoin and crypto is like, okay, well, how is governance working? Here's a protocol that's organizing resources, that's providing this system, and I won't say it's totally self-sustaining, but it's kind of automatic in a sense that it's not in anyone's interest to extract or sabotage the system, because everyone will, that actor, that attacker will basically destroy the fruits of their adventure. And so our current system with the rent seekers, there's no penalty for behaving badly. Whereas many of these blockchain systems, particularly some of the staking mechanisms, so we talk about consensus models. Bitcoin is what's called proof of work. It uses mining and electricity. There are other models that require the token or the currency on the network to be pledged or kind of locked up as collateral, staked, and this is done with algorithms. And if that address or that wallet holder or that investor, that participant who has staked the assets is a bad actor, like tries to push through a fraudulent transaction, for example, there's a mechanism to slash their holdings. So like the governance models that are happening in crypto, if we can figure out a way to translate them from the nerd world of software development, and I think it's starting to happen, like converge with real world problems. I think there's a lot there.
I guess my question with that goes back to like, I think for me, it's more of like an accessibility issue, right? So like crypto is offering this like alternative that, solves like a lot of these problems that we have with how these systems and institutions run. But I feel like it goes back to like, it feels like inaccessible. Like if I'm like, okay, I want to like invest in this system right now because I do see the benefits of it, that's kind of nearly impossible. It feels like, I could be wrong. So like, how does, I think with, as you see like more and more, and maybe because of the pandemic, people looking into these alternatives, like how does it become, how is it not propping up like the worst of kind of this system of like in terms of like who's able to have access to it, right? Because it kind of seems like to me that the people who have access to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency are people with resources already.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's intimidating for a long time, just technically, even if you heard about it, how would you figure out where to go, what to do? And even with all the hype that many of us on this call are aware of, it's still really under the radar in many ways, and vastly inaccessible. This is definitely a huge problem. I think it's grassroots, and what's great about basically what's happened with crypto, though, is that we don't know all of the answers for how the system will evolve or where the opportunities will be, how we can integrate this technology. But you can today own a stake in it. You can today, even with $5, you can buy $5 worth of Bitcoin, for example. So you don't actually have to have a lot of money to participate. And it's something I encourage, because when you've made that switch from being a no coiner to being kind of owning a piece of the future, or the piece of these new technology, it really shifts your awareness and comfort level to learn more. And by having some of the assets that at least some of the new open blockchains are based on, is a way potentially of participating in what's to come. And but definitely education and making it accessible, but is it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's not inaccessible structurally. So it's the type of opportunity, really, I don't think that's existed to date with a financial product that anyone can actually just with a phone anywhere in the world, download an app and have their own, central bank in their pocket. So it's possible, but there are many barriers.
That's true. I was frustrated setting up my Coinbase account because you have to like show your ID and there's like all these two factors, but in reality, it's a lot simpler than going to the bank.
Yeah, I mean, these psychological barriers and the physical barriers, this is an extraordinary transition, both from the analog world to the digital. And I think with the pandemic, the necessity or the helpfulness of being able to transact and move value in the way that's possible with these new networks is really gaining in mind share at every level of government and business.
There's also this beautiful, I'm always a big fan of like looking backwards to move forward, and the roots of Bitcoin are just genius. I mean, I remember, the access has changed, but ultimately,
Are you still there, Mark?
We lost you.
I think we lost Mark for now. So I'm gonna mute, and then
But we didn't lose him to a driving accident.
Yeah, it sounds maybe under a bridge or something. I do like that Mark is like invested to me, listening into the conversation while driving and stuff. I just saw Eric mention that there's require a ton of energy. I know there are server farms near us in upstate New York. I actually met someone who was setting up a server farm, and they were very hush hush about it. Like I was like, "Are you spies? Like what's going on?"
They're going to be mining cryptocurrency probably.
Yeah, they were like,
awesome.
we like, yeah, they were like really, they were like Scottish. it was weird. I was like, what are you doing here? And they were just being really shy. And they were like, they finally, after a while, told me. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. And they felt more comfortable talking to me about it.
Oh, I'll take that offline with you. I'll be very curious to hear more. Well,
Yeah,
we're
kinda creepy.
we're coming to the end of the hour. That went by so quickly. 4 more minutes. I guess just love to get any last comments, things that people would love to do a deeper dive on in our next session, which is in 4 weeks. We might do, if anyone here's on Clubhouse, Shanika and I talked about maybe spinning up a conversation on Clubhouse.
And I'll send an email. I'll send an email out to everyone when we figure out a date. And I have a few invites. So if you're nice in the email, I might send you one.
Great.
People are selling those.
You're kidding. Well, I saw a tweet today of somebody, there's only available on Apple for like iOS. So the Samsung people are very, or I don't even know what the other operating system's called. What is it? Google?
Android.
Android, right. The Android people are like severely feeling like stepchildren right now. All the cool kids are on Clubhouse. And yeah, I've got some invitations too. It's a great audio only platform. We can all get into a room, and maybe we can even bring others from anywhere in the world, whoever's on that app, see where it takes us. So we'll try and set something like that up before the next session, like we did our Instagram Live. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. For sure, reach out to, I'm on Instagram and Twitter, FHO Money or Spark of Hudson. If you're thinking of things on this topic you'd like us to prepare for next month. And otherwise, that's
yeah.
a wrap.
Thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Kianga, for hosting this discussion. Honestly, I felt like the hour just really flew by. I'm really excited for the next one in our clubhouse.
That's right. We'll meet you guys at the club.
Awesome.
See you at the
Yeah.
club. All right, thanks everyone. Great to meet and talk with all of you. Do it again.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.